welcome everyone to the Detachment 538 podcast. Today we're joined by Lieutenant Reidel. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How are you? It's good to be here.
I'm doing it fantastic. So before we get started here, mind just introducing yourself and telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Like you said, my name's Lieutenant Reidel, and I'm stationed currently at Travis Air Force Base in California. I'm originally from Rochester, New York. That's where I first enlisted when I was 17. I worked at Niagara Falls Air Reserve Station, and then later went to school at Rochester Institute of Technology. And while I was there, I was also in the reserves, but then I commissioned into active duty as an Airfield Operations Officer.
That's some cool stuff. And just for the audience, this podcast today is going to be split into two sections. First, we're going to be talking about your job as an Airfield Operations Officer and a lot about that. And then the second half, we're going to talk a little bit about your enlisted experience going through ROTC as enlisted and all of that. So on to the job stuff. You're an Airfield Operations Officer. Sounds like a pretty cool job, but I don't think many people know too much about it. So
no, they don't. So even when I was looking into career fields, Airfield Operations caught my eye because it is an ops-centric career without actually being a pilot. There's not a lot of officers that are really involved in ops as much that aren't flyers. So I wasn't as interested in flying and I wanted to stay in ops. I had a very ops-centric enlisted career field. So Airfield Operations caught my eye, and there is very, very little about it. Even the airforce.com description of it is not even close to accurate. It kind of points you in the right direction, but it doesn't tell you that much about it. And there's very little on the internet, and I'd never met an Airfield Ops officer, which is 13 Mike. So what we do, and I'm going to actually read the official description that was sent out by our functionals. It's a really good description, so I'm not even going to attempt to do something better than them. But here's our specialty description, okay? So 13 Mikes perform and lead airfield operations, otherwise known as AO, functions of air traffic control, airfield management, and radar airfield and weather systems, which is called RAWS, and airspace management within national and international airspace in both peacetime and combat environments. We advise commanders on the effective use of AO assets, provide airfield ops staff leadership, supervision, and technical assistance. We're also responsible for developing, formulating, and implementing plans and policies and programs for executing Air Force responsibilities and activities. And that might include supporting civil aviation responsibilities as well. And part of our duties are to train and establish standards within airfield operations and conduct operational evaluations in order to make sure our unit training and performance is up to standard. It's also really important that we make sure all of our airfield operations personnel, they have the job skills that are required to execute the mission. And we'll also be in charge of things like funding and making sure our unit has what they need. Construction's a big part of it, where we have our hands in construction, the funding for that, the funding for any equipment we need, because we deal with some of the most expensive equipment on the base aside from the aircraft themselves. So that's kind of the slightly my version of the specialty description that's sent out by the Airfield Operations Officer functionals.
Yeah, so just breaking that down a bit, there was quite a lot of information.
There's a lot.
Is that something? So is that something that every Airfield Operations Officer is expected to know and do all of those things, or is there like specialties, or it depends on your base? Like, how's that work?
The description that I just read is the base that Airfield Operations Officers are expected to know and be able to execute. So our main functions in our flights will generally have air traffic control, airfield management, and that RAWS technician group, that radar airfield weather system. You might go to a place that maybe RAWS maintenance isn't as prevalent. Those main functions, that is the base. You might go off and do something else. You might work in a smaller team or a different team, might do some specialty career broadening, but for the most part, that is the base. That's what we're trained to do.
Gotcha. And over email, you seem so excited to talk about the training pipeline. So what you got for us there in terms of the training pipeline? And also, I presume there's probably a lot of on-the-job training as well that goes with this job, but talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So we're expected to do on-the-job training for approximately 1.5 to 2 years. So if you're get into airfield operations and you're going to your first base, you're not expected to be in a leadership role right off the bat, which is something that has changed recently. In the past, airfield or 13 mics, you would go to your base, you'd go to tech school, and when you got back from tech school, you would be doing your upgrade training on the side, and then you'd also be operating in like a systems officer or potentially even a director of operations role, taking on tasks for the unit while doing your upgrade training. And what they found was that the flight commanders who were responsible for training the lieutenants, they weren't maybe seasoned enough to have the expertise to teach them. They didn't have the time to teach them because flight commanders are really, really busy. And so what they started doing was, instead of sending out these 13 mics to all the different bases and having them upgrade, they actually just picked 4 bases, and they're sending all of the 13 mics to those 4 bases. They're sending them off to tech school, which now has been broken up into 2 parts. You go to part A, you come back to one of those 4 bases, you start working on all of your different training requirements, and you'll train in every single section. You'll train with airfield managers, and the airfield managers are going to teach you about airfield inspections, airfield lighting, the concrete, the parking plans, bird watch conditions, hazardous conditions, snow removal, wildlife management, all that stuff. And you'll work with them for a few months, and then you'll go over to air traffic control, and you'll learn about all the equipment, about the surrounding area of your particular base. You'll learn how to operate in ground control. So you'll be telling the aircraft, you'll basically giving them instruction to taxi them to the runway, things like that, and managing that kind of control. You'll go over to the Radar Airfield Weather System office, and you'll go out on preventative maintenance inspections. They're going to take you to look at the instrument landing systems, the radar, whatever your airfield has, and you're going to work with them. You're going to study their books and get a feel of what they do. And one of the really important things about doing this is you need to be able to advocate for each of your sections. Sometimes you have to manage their interfacility issues. If, radar technicians are saying, hey, you keep breaking our equipment, and traffic, air traffic control is like, no, this isn't what we need. You can kind of work together. But so you'll go and you'll train with them. Then you go back to tech school, which is at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, and you'll do a second half. You'll do radar approach control, which is a function of air traffic, but on a larger airspace. Just in a larger airspace. And then you will also do landing zone operations, which could be used potentially for austere runways or austere airfields, potentially. And then after that, you'll go to your next base, where you would most likely fill a director of operations role or a flight commander role.
And from your description, it seems like there's a lot of different teams you're working with all at once. So is there a lot of visits that go to each team while you're on the job, trying to make sure everyone is okay and up to date and stuff? Or how does that kind of work?
Oh, absolutely. You see your flight chiefs frequently. All your enlisted leaders of each section, you're going to deal with them pretty much on a daily basis, if not weekly. It also depends on your leadership style, how many meetings you want to have. But they are very, very busy people as well. So you want to be respectful of their time. But you're going to try to make your way around all the time, but it sometimes can be difficult because airfield ops can get pretty busy. But you normally have, the way the general airfield operations flight is set up, is that there is one flight commander, which is a 13 mic, and then there's a director of operations. If you're lucky, sometimes you'll have a third, which is a systems officer role.
So the next question for airfield operations, what is the officer to enlisted ratio look like, of how many enlisted that are underneath you? And how has that changed from second lieutenant to as you progress through the ranks as well?
So it's not really going to be based on your rank at all. It's completely location based. So the flight that I'm in, it's one of the largest AMC airfield operations flights in the MAGCOM. So we have approximately 135 people, including civilians. This is partly because we're a complex, and a complex means that our air traffic control section is made up of both the tower and a RAPCON that I mentioned earlier. And your RAPCON deals with a much wider airspace, and they're going to have approach control functions. Some bases don't have that. And you could be in charge of a much smaller group, or a much smaller flight, I should say. I'm aware of some situations where the flight is so small that it also incorporates other offices that you wouldn't normally see in the flight, such as weather or aircrew flight equipment, things like that.
So how many airfield operations officers are there usually per base, or at least at your base? It probably varies from base to base, but
approximately 2, sometimes less, sometimes more. If you're not dealing with any lieutenant trainees, usually 2.
And something you mentioned in an email to me was that a lot of pilot dropouts or washouts end up in this career field. Why do you think that is? Is it just because they want to stay close to planes and stuff like that?
Well, sometimes it's not the individual's choice. Sometimes it is. I think you still get a dream sheet. If you do washout, you get to put your priorities, or your preferences. I mean, not priorities, but one of the main reasons is because you already have your initial flight physical as a pilot or a pilot student, and you need to have a flight physical for the 13-minute career field. It's actually one of the few that is considered rated that isn't flying. So this is considered a rated this is considered a rated career field. We get an initial flight class physical, 3rd level, and we do go see flight med. We don't go to the regular family medicine.
Oh, that's pretty interesting that it's considered a rated field. So is there a special process going from ROTC into the career field, or you just throw it on your dream sheet, like a regular dream sheet, and then you get it?
Yeah, it's well, to be honest with you, my personal experience, I'm not sure. I think there was maybe a blunder along the way, because I did not get a flight class physical before I was selected for airfield operations. It wasn't until my EAD got pushed almost a year that the cadre started asking what's going on, why is she getting pushed so far? And they said, well, she doesn't have a flight physical on file. We can't take her yet. So that's when I found out I needed one, and the cadre found out I needed one, because there wasn't a lot of information about airfield ops cadets, or I should say lieutenants, going into the field.
And so for me, I'm not a big plane guy personally. We have plenty of like plane geeks and stuff at the detachment, but this is still a career field that I was actually really interested in. That's why I reached out to interview you. Is there a place for people who aren't like plane geeks, as I call them, in this career field?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I'm really a plane geek. There's lots of people who aren't. In fact, we're not a plane centric. We are mission centric, and there's so much going on that we manage that isn't plane related. Like pretty much the whole airfield is our concern, except for the planes, the parking plan at most. And then there's the air traffic control piece where you're talking to them and you care about flight plans, you care about, different routes that they take, you care about that kind of thing, and making the mission happen. And we're very hands-on with making the mission happen. So if you want to be up close and personal with ops, but you don't want to know everything there is to know about planes, or you're not, this plane geek, then that's fine. You'll fit right in. If you are a plane geek, that it only helps you, because you might have more information about aircraft that might become useful, whether it's in air traffic control or even airfield management.
Awesome. So something I love to ask people on the show is about their day in the life. When people want to choose a career field, they definitely want to hear a little bit of what that day looks like. So what's your day typically look like, from wake up to sleep in this career field?
Well, that's the best thing about this job is that there isn't necessarily a standard day in the life, which is something that really appealed to me when I found out about the career field. I personally am one, I like change. I like a schedule that changes. I like when things ebb and flow. For the most part, you'll find yourself as a 13 mic on office hours, but currently where I'm at in training, I'm working in the air traffic control tower. So I'm currently on shifts with my crew. So I'm on a rotating schedule. I work 2 days, 2 swings, 2 days off. However, your standard 13 mic life could be anything from being woken up in the middle of the night because there's a piece of equipment that went down and it needs to get fixed. And in the morning, the ops group commander is going to want to know about it. So you need to tell the OSS commander about it. You're going to be that number one. You're going to be that go-to person, the point man for that. You could be staying late one day because you need to launch the fleet because there's a weather evacuation going on. You might be working on awards and decorations one day. You might be scheduling anything from flight checks to training to, TDYs, things like that. It could really change, and your scope is so broad that there's a lot of potential to change. Construction projects are long, tedious projects that take years of planning, and you might be planning for construction that you'll never see happen because you'll be gone, or you might be executing construction. We're currently just finished executing a lot of construction on our airfield that we didn't plan because it's been in the works for so long.
Wow, so you guys do quite a few things. This interview just making me more excited to put it number one on my dream sheet. Before it was number 3, number 4. I think it's going up to number 1 after this. But.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a really cool career field. It's small. We're in touch with a lot of other 13 mics. There's a lot of networking. If you're a people person, this is a really good career field because not only do you need to network with this flight of so many different sections that you have to unify and get to know, but at the same time, you also have to coordinate with lots of other sections. So you're close to your airfield, or I'm sorry, your OSS commander. You're in touch with what's going on with the OG. If there's drone operations at your base, you're going to be, working with them very closely because that's your airspace that you're in charge of. You're going to be working with CE very closely, civil engineering, because they're going to be fixing everything that's wrong with your runway. You'd be surprised how fast runways can degrade and how often you need to scrape the rubber off the runways, things like that. There's a lot to do.
And I think that transitions us into the next question pretty well about civilian career opportunities. What kind of opportunities are there after the military for them?
So a lot of people's first instinct, because we are rated, and the reason we get that flight physical is because we are rated as air traffic controllers, and air traffic controllers have to be rated. So a lot of people's first instinct is, oh, you can go work for the FAA and be an air traffic controller. If that was something you're interested in, I think you could segue into being an air traffic controller or something in airfield management on the civilian side. I think that's reasonable, but it's not necessarily our skill set. I'm not going to learn how to control aircraft fully. I'm not going to be in local control. So some of the options that are available to 13 mic personnel, and this also could vary depending on what specialties you get into, but you could get into something like aircraft mishap investigation. You could work for the government as a civilian, potentially in a DoD headquarters, such as for example, I could work at AMC up in A3, which is the ops section of MAGCOM. You could do something like that. I could even work as a civilian 13 mic, depending on the location on that. So you could move into something airfield management related. It's hard to sort of pin down one thing, but you could go into a range of almost anything in headquarters or AFSA, things like that. There's a lot of different routes depending on your interest. It would really depend on what you wanted to know specifically about.
And the last question I have regarding this section about Airfield Operations Officer of the podcast is overseas opportunities. Is there any overseas opportunities available for
Oh my
13 months?
gosh, loads. And if you like to travel, this also might be a career field for you because we don't stay in one spot long. So we're typically at one location for approximately 2 to 3 years. So if you like to move and see new places, it's a good place. Pretty much anywhere there is an airfield, we can go. So there are short tour, long tour opportunities overseas, Hawaii, Alaska, all over Europe, the Middle East as well. I personally just put in for several different overseas locations, so keep your fingers crossed for me that I'll get one of those. But you could pretty much go anywhere. And a couple of the other things that you can do that actually drew me to airfield operations was if if you're thinking maybe working in such a large flight and managing a large team isn't necessarily your thing, or you might want to build to that, or you don't want to just do that your whole career, there are other options. One of the subspecialties of 13 mics is combat airspace and managing the opening and closing of airspace. This could be something from a deployment, or you could do it at an air operations center or a KOC overseas. There's a few locations, and that would be managing a small team, usually overseas, of air traffic controllers that are responsible for this airspace. So that's a small team dynamic that you might run into, especially in an overseas location. And the other one that's really popular, a lot of people want to get into it, is contingency response. And this is where they take a few people from each of the career fields, and even more than just airfield management. They'll take a couple security forces, they'll take pilots and aircrew, they'll take anyone from the airfield operations flight, and they put them into a small group, and they'll put a 13 mic in charge of them, and they will say, okay, we're gonna equip you to respond to a variety of things, whether it's weather, whether it's what just happened recently in Kabul. They'll send a contingency response group, and you might be operating out of very austere runway or airfield conditions, usually into something after maybe combat controller set up. If they need to make that last, then they'll send a contingency response team. So there's another small team dynamic, a smaller team dynamic, and they go all over the world. You might be stationed in Guam and be sent on constant TDYs throughout the year, things like that, and loads of overseas opportunities if you're in a contingency response group.
Yep. So that's all the questions I have in terms of airfield operations officers. If there's anything else you want to add before we move on to the enlisted section, you can go ahead.
I think we covered most of it. It's a career field with a long training period, lots to learn. There's constant growth opportunities. There's a variety of different specialties. You might even be drawn to something like aircraft incidents, investigations, things like that, plans and procedures. We're small. We're in touch with our assignments and our functional personnel, which I really like. It's a small community. They monitor us very closely as far as our success and where we go with our careers. It's not like we're out in the wind where, there's eyes on us, and which is really nice to know that we're in a close-knit career field, even though there is only a few of us at each base. So if this is something that you like, the change, then airfield operations might be a good choice for you.
Awesome stuff. So now on to the second section about enlisted life, because you were enlisted for 10 years, right?
Yes, 10 years.
And I'm not sure if I caught it earlier. What was your AFSC when you were enlisted?
I was a 1 Charlie 3. I was a command post controller.
Gotcha. So what prompted you from wanting to go to enlisted to commission as an officer?
It wasn't actually something I wanted to do initially. I really enjoyed being enlisted. I enjoyed the culture. I enjoyed my job. I liked being hands-on and executing the mission at a, quote unquote front lines, because when you're an officer, you're not really executing as much as you are directing and managing and making sure the mission gets done through those frontline folks. But it was on my last deployment. I was at Al Udeid, and I was able to work in I was working in the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center, particularly the battle cab. And I was one of the only enlisted people in there. And I happened to rub shoulders with a lot of just outstanding captains through colonels and 06s, even in our sister services, the Marines and the Navy, as well as the Royal Air Force too, and some of our Australian counterparts. And working with them was really eye-opening, and seeing how they could function and execute things, even though they weren't hands-on like I was with my smaller focus. They were hands-on with a larger focus. They were the battle directors. They were, the CFAC, which was actually, it was General Brown at the time when I was there. And so I got to work with him. I'm certain he does not remember me, but they really encouraged me to consider going into an officer career field. So while I was there is when I applied to RIT and I got accepted. And probably 3 weeks when I got home from that deployment, I was at RIT starting my first fall semester, and I kind of stumbled into the ROTC detachment. I wasn't entirely sold on if I was going to do it or not. And I met the detachment commander and the operations captain, and I said, hey, I think I'm interested. And they're like, well, show up and you can leave anytime. And there I was, and now I'm here.
And does that process involve like a lot of paperwork going from enlisted to ROTC? Or?
Not really. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you are enlisted active duty, you might separate from active duty and then go into ROTC. Since I was a reservist, I kept my contract current with the reserves, and I didn't contract with ROTC until a month out before graduation. That's the least amount of time that you can separate in. So, or you're required to separate within a month of graduation at the very least. So I stayed in the reserves. I wanted to stay current and active in my job and keep any TDY opportunities open. There wasn't a lot of paperwork. I had to have my commanders sign a conditional release. And then when the time came, I just had to out process and separate from the reserves. So it wasn't, I probably had less paperwork than some of my contemporaries.
And what was that ROTC like? Because obviously you've been enlisted for 10 years, probably older than most of the cadets there. And now you're kind of getting taught by them, maybe even yelled at them, depending on the day. So what was that kind of like?
It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for me to, sit back, sometimes hold my tongue, practice some patience. It was a hard act to go from trying to mentor to sitting back and letting people make their mistakes, because one of the things I was really passionate about was, as a supervisor and someone who's experienced, I had experiences with bad leadership. And if I saw traits, and there's a stereotypical, new officers, officers don't get it. So when I saw those traits in cadets, which I knew would translate into those behaviors as officers, of people who have real authority, I would try to step up without being obnoxious. But sometimes it was difficult. It wasn't always well received, but that just depends on, the people at the time.
Yeah, of course. Was there anything you wish you knew looking back at ROTC before you went into the program?
Anything I wish I knew? I guess it took me a little bit of time to get on board with being a cadet. I was told, as I'm sure many people are told, ROTC isn't that big of a commitment. You've got your classes, you've got your PT, and you've got lab, and then that's really all there is. And there's non-required things to attend, but basically if you don't attend them, then you're not showing up for the team, and that does reflect on you, and that does say a lot about how far you're willing to go. So I wasn't on board 100% when I first got into ROTC, and I didn't show up to things, and I said, hey, I don't have to, so I'm not going to. And I'm a NCO. I don't want to do this in my spare time. You guys can go learn how to march. I'm not going to drill practice, things like that. And it took me a while, but I eventually got on board and, got full into it and like played the game and wanted to be a part of the team.
And you mentioned when you were in ROTC, you saw cadets with maybe traits that you saw didn't maybe translate into the Air Force that well. Mind sharing any of these traits that people should maybe wash themselves on a little bit?
Yeah, one of the big things, both in cadets and officers, even now that I'll run into it, is just a lack of humility. And there seems to be this idea of I need to be this leader, I need to be something, and making really conscious decisions to show that you're in charge. You don't really need to show you're in charge. Either you're in charge or you're not. If you're the leader for a situation, go ahead and lead, but you shouldn't need to, be harsh in any capacity. Just some of the traits, yeah. Just, I mean, just be, if you're gonna be like a pretty genuinely good person, that's all you need. You don't have to force people to respect you. If you do your job and you treat people fairly, usually they'll respect you, and you don't have to try to earn respect.
That's some great points. So that's actually all the questions I got for today. Any last thoughts or remarks to anyone at Detachment 538, any cadets, anything like that?
Well, I do wish everyone the best at 538. You guys have a very special place in my heart, and it's really nice to see that the podcast has been started. I think it's a great idea, and I really enjoy seeing how you all progress. And I'm really proud. I'm really proud to tell people I'm from 538. And I would just say, if you are interested in airfield operations and you have any more questions, if I didn't answer anything, I would be happy for anyone to reach out. And as if if these sounds like traits and the things that I do on a day-to-day, if it sounds like something you're interested in, I think you should go for it. It's a great career field. I'm very happy that I'm in it. And if you are perhaps currently enlisted or thinking about going to ROTC, thinking about making the switch to enlisted or from enlisted to officer, whether it's through ROTC or not, I would say, look at your reasons for why you want to do it. There is a lot of opportunity to affect a different kind of change than when you're enlisted. But it is a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work to go through the officer training, to put in your package, and then to be in charge, especially of such a large group of people, potentially as airfield operations or, whatever it is that you want to do. So just weigh it carefully. If you're not interested in putting in the work to get there, you might not be ready to be a leader anyway. That might not be if you're not ready to take it on. So just weigh it carefully. I think it's really important to make sure that your heart's in the right place, because there's enough people who, they did it for the money, or they did it because of what they could get out of the Air Force. But it's really important, I would say, to cadets, enlisted officers, anyone who is listening, I would say it's really important to put your heart in the right place and put people first.
Thank you for your time, ma'am, and thank you for everything you said. I think this was pretty productive today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking me.